Let me tell you something that no one's saying out loud. India just walked away from America. Yeah, you heard that right. This isn't just about trade. This is a mic drop moment in world history. Because when a rising superpower decides to stop playing by someone else's rules, that's not rebellion. That's revolution. And before you jump to conclusions, no, this isn't about hate or hostility or some overnight decision made in anger. This is about decades of quiet disrespect, of deals that benefited one side while allow the other swallowed the cost. And now India's done swallowing his. So buckle up because we're going to break this down point by point. And by the end of this, you'll realize this isn't India walking away. This is India standing up. This is not some viral news headline. This is not some emotional nationalism. This is fact, logic, data, history. And power. And I'm going to walk you through exactly why India made this move, what triggered it, and how this changes everything. Not just for India, not just for America, but for the entire global economy. Let's start with the first truth that people avoid. 1. The ticking time bomb trade was never equal. Let's get one thing straight. This trade fallout between India and America didn't just happen overnight. It's been building for decades quietly, silently, under the radar. And no one talked about it because it was too uncomfortable. But here's the real truth. This trade relationship was never equal to begin with. Sure, on the surface, both countries seemed to benefit. But when you peel back the layers, what you find is a system that kept India stuck in the role of supplier. Cheap labor, raw materials, low-margin exports, while the U.S., dominated with high-end technology, pharmaceuticals, and defense equipment. It was never a level playing field. America exported iPhones and fighter jets. India exported cotton and generic medicine. This wasn't a partnership. It was a hierarchy. And India stayed in that role for years because it had no choice. It was still growing, still stabilizing, still recovering from colonial damage and economic dependence. But something shifted over the last 15 years. India started rising not just in GDP, but in global influence, digital capability, manufacturing power, and strategic thinking. And as India grew, the imbalance became harder to ignore. Every trade negotiation, every tariff discussion, every WTO dispute started to feel like a tug of war. One side pulling with muscle, the other trying to hold its ground. India realized it wasn't getting a fair deal. Its industries were undercut. Its markets flooded, its farmers squeezed. And when it pushed back asking for tariffs, subsidies, or protection, it faced resistance from the very partner claiming to support free and fair trade. That contradiction, that's what opened India's eyes. This wasn't mutual growth. This was quiet exploitation dressed up in diplomacy. And finally, India decided, we're done playing that game. 2. The real cost of free trade. Let's talk about this idea of free trade. Sounds great, right? Open markets, fair competition, mutual growth. But here's the catch. It was never really free, at least not for India. What looked like open doors were actually carefully designed frameworks that gave developed nations, especially the U.S., a permanent advantage. When India signed on to trade agreements under global platforms like the WTO, it walked into a system that was already tilted. The rules were written in boardrooms far away from Indian soil by people who never had to think about Indian farmers, small manufacturers, or rural workers. Every time India tried to protect its domestic industries, whether it was through import tariffs, subsidies for farmers, or restrictions on foreign companies dominating key sectors, it was met with pushback, legal threats, diplomatic pressure. And media narratives followed. Protectionism, they called it. But when the U.S. subsidized its own agriculture, tech, or oil, that was called national interest. You see the double standard. India was told to play by the rules even when those rules choked its growth. It couldn't prioritize its people without being labeled anti-global. But the truth is this so-called free trade came with invisible handcuffs. Every decision had to pass a Western approval filter. That's not trade, that's control. And over time, the cost of that control became too high. India's farmers protested, its industry stagnated, and its growth potential was capped all because of deals it couldn't rewrite. Eventually, India had to ask the hard question, is free trade really worth it if the price is our sovereignty? The answer became clear, not anymore. 3. Strategic sovereignty. India's rise as a global power. There comes a point when a country stops asking for a seat at the table and starts building its own. That's exactly where India is right now. For decades, it was seen as a developing nation. Important, yes, but never quite equal to the big players. But that label doesn't fit anymore. India is now the 5th largest economy in the world, with a tech industry that's reshaping global supply chains. A startup ecosystem that's drawing billions in investment, and a defense program that's going toe-to-toe with traditional military powers. This isn't a country waiting to be invited in. This is a country stepping forward on its own terms. Strategic sovereignty means more than economic growth. It means control over decisions, over policies, over partnerships. India no longer wants to be caught in the middle of global power plays. It doesn't want to rely on any one country for critical imports. Whether it's defense equipment, semiconductors, or oil, that dependency, that's the weak link, and India is cutting it off link by link. Walking away from trade dependencies isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of maturity. It's a sign that India is done asking for permission to prioritize its own interests. Whether it's negotiating better trade deals, pushing back on unfair sanctions, or diversifying its supply chain partners, India is making one thing clear. It will not be anyone's pawn. Not anymore. This shift isn't just bold. It's overdue. And it's not about turning away from the world. It's about engaging with it powerfully and independently. India is rewriting its place in the global order not as a junior partner, but as a sovereign force with a clear voice. 4. The trigger point. Tech sanctions and weaponization. Every strong relationship has a breaking point, a moment when one side pushes just a little too far. For India, that moment came when trade stopped being about economics and started becoming a tool of pressure. The U.S., knowingly or not, began to weaponize trade, whether it was placing India on a priority watch list for intellectual property, delaying defense tech transfers, or imposing restrictions on semiconductor and AI technology exports. The message was loud and clear. Cooperate on our terms or face consequences. India saw this happening in real time. It was no longer about negotiations. It was about conditions. The U.S. began using access to critical technologies as leverage. Want that drone tech? Agree to our strategic demands. Want semiconductor support? Shift your alliances. This wasn't partnership. It was coercion. India, which has always balanced its foreign policy with a focus on autonomy, felt that pressure closing in. Then came the red lines when India refused to take sides in geopolitical conflicts or when it continued energy deals with nations under Western sanctions. The retaliation started through trade, restrictions, delays, silent punishments, and India realized this wasn't sustainable. It couldn't build its future around a partner, willing to turn off the tap the moment New Delhi made an independent decision. This wasn't paranoia. It was reality. Other nations had faced the same treatment. Economic bullying masked as diplomacy. India watched, learned, and drew a line in the sand. The final straw wasn't a tariff or a policy. It was the realization that dependency is vulnerability. And India, a nation built on resilience, refuses to be vulnerable. That's why it started pulling back quietly. Strategically, because trade should be a bridge, not a leash. When India decided to walk away from its trade dependency on America, it didn't do so blindly. This wasn't a reckless exit. It was a well-calculated shift. The idea that India would suffer without U.S. trade ties is outdated thinking. Today's India has options and it's using them. In fact, instead of shrinking, India's global trade footprint is expanding, just not through the usual Western pipelines. India has been steadily building stronger ties with BRICS nations like Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa, focusing on trade in local currencies and bypassing the dollar where possible. It's deepening connections with Southeast Asian countries through the ASEAN framework. Signing new trade agreements that actually respect mutual interests. Africa, long overlooked by the West, is becoming a strategic partner for Indian pharmaceuticals, infrastructure, and education exports. Even Latin America is on India's radar, offering untapped markets hungry for diversification. This diversification isn't just smart, it's powerful. It gives India bargaining power, flexibility, and the ability to absorb shocks. If one trade lane slows down, another one opens up. Unlike in the past, India isn't stuck waiting for a green signal from Washington to move forward. And let's be clear, global corporations are still investing in India. From Apple to Tesla to Google, the world sees India as the next big market. Regardless of its U.S. trade stance, supply chains are relocating here. Data centers are being built. India isn't isolating itself. It's positioning itself as the hub. The truth is, India didn't cut off trade. It rerouted it away from dependency toward opportunity. And that single move is what's making nations pay attention. Because when you walk away from a superpower and still thrive, the world starts to wonder, what do you know that they don't? Most people look at India's decision to step back from U.S.-centered trade and think it's a rebellion. But it's not. It's a rebirth. What the West calls defiance, India calls direction. This move wasn't about ego or making headlines. It was about reclaiming control over its own future. For decades, India had been told how to grow, where to invest, and what its role in the global order should be. But now it's making its own rules. And that's the part nobody wants to talk about. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When a nation starts choosing itself over legacy deals, over outdated hierarchies, and over unequal partnerships, it disrupts the system. It threatens the comfort of those who have long benefited from the imbalance. That's exactly what India is doing, challenging the assumption that it will always play second to someone else's lead. This isn't about cutting ties. It's about cutting limits. India is no longer the junior partner in global economics. It's investing in homegrown manufacturing, pushing digital independence, and forging bilateral trade deals that reflect equality, not submission. It's standing up for its farmers, its workers, and its entrepreneurs instead of bending to global pressures that serve foreign interests first. That kind of clarity, that kind of confidence, it scares the old guard. But for India, it's liberating because for the first time in modern history, India isn't reacting to global shifts, it's creating them. And when you make moves that bold, you don't need to explain yourself. You let the results speak. India's trade pivot isn't a retreat. It's a declaration. We know who we are, what we're worth, and we're not waiting for anyone's validation anymore. So here's the truth no one's telling you. India didn't end trade with America out of fear. It didn't walk away because it was weak. It walked away because it was finally strong enough to do so. This was not an exit. India's bold departure from trade dependency on the United States is not a sudden act of defiance, nor is it a knee-jerk reaction to temporary policy disputes. It is the result of years of quiet introspection, painful compromises, strategic recalibration, and finally, a powerful realization that sovereignty, self-respect, and sustainable growth cannot be outsourced. For decades, India tolerated a global system designed to favor the West. It played by rules it didn't write. Abided by conditions that suppressed its local industries and made sacrifices under the illusion of fairness. But all of that has changed. This is not India seeking conflict. This is India reclaiming clarity, a clarity rooted in its economic strength, its technological innovation, its rising middle class, and its rapidly expanding global partnerships. India has recognized that in a world shaped by multipolar realities, playing second to anyone is not an obligation. It's a choice, and India has chosen differently. It is no longer seeking permission to act in its best interests. It is setting the agenda. It is building alliances that reflect parity, not pressure. It is stepping into energy deals, trade pacts, and diplomatic frameworks that allow it to act freely and boldly. Not cautiously and conditionally. And that is what has truly unsettled the old world order. The same West that once expected India to follow is now forced to adjust its compass. The rules have changed. The balance has shifted. The assumption that India needs the West more than the West needs India is no longer true, and that terrifies those who have long benefited from imbalance. India's pivot away from America-centric trade is not about turning inward, it's about looking forward. It's about building from within while connecting outward on equal terms. It's about replacing one-sided dependencies with diversified strength. The world is watching a country that doesn't just want growth. It demands dignity with that growth. India is not walking away from the global stage. It is walking onto it with a new posture, upright, unapologetic, and unshaken. This is not a rebellion, it is a renaissance. This is not resistance, it is rebirth. The West may view this shift as a disruption, but for India, it is simply direction, long overdue and now irreversible. This moment will be remembered not as the day India exited a trade arrangement, but as the day it entered a new era of self-defined power. And in doing so, it sent a message not just to the United States, but to every nation watching: we are not the India you used to know. We are not the silent partner anymore. We are not your manufacturing arm, your cheap labor base, or your diplomatic pawn. We are a sovereign force, a civilizational power, and we are no longer asking for a seat at your table. We are building our own, with open hands for partners. But closed doors to manipulation. The world must now deal with an India that doesn't just know its worth. It is finally unafraid to act like it. And that changes everything.